So when I introduced this woman as a professor of bioethics and a director of UNSW's Disability Innovation Institute, and if you want to read all the letters after her name, without even thinking, you might make assumptions about her background, about the advantages she's had. But Professor Jackie Leach Scully is someone who, well, I would say has sidestepped assumptions all her life to be the person she is and to contribute what she does. And she tells her story on Perspective Shift on the ABC's Compass, and we're using closed captions on a video call. Hello, Jackie.
Hello, Helen.
What does your institute at the University of New South Wales focus on?
Well, it's called the Disability Innovation Institute. It focuses clearly on disability. There are a lot of disability research institutes around in Australia and the rest of the world. What we like to think makes us stand out is that we start from the belief that disability is a part of life. It's a normal part of everyday life because it will affect an awful lot of people, if not all of us, if we're lucky enough to live long enough. And so it should be something that we try to understand, that we try to engage with, that we try to treat as normal rather than as something to be afraid of or hostile towards.
Do you find it's still rare that people in high positions at institutes or major bodies dealing with disability actually have lived experience of disability?
It is still pretty rare. Of course, there are quite a lot of people in high positions and other positions who choose not to disclose that they have a disability. And in many ways, I think that's a shame. And it's a bit of a hangover from the days when disability definitely was something to be ashamed of. I'm pleased to see that more people nowadays are treating it as just another attribute of themselves and are being very open about it. But for a number of reasons, I think it's still true that there are fewer people with disability achieving at high level than you'd expect from the number of people with disability in the general population.
Oxford University to Switzerland into the fellowship of the Academy of Social Sciences in the UK, and then starting up this institute at the University of New South Wales. Did you think TV star was going to come up as part of this list of career achievements?
No, not at all. And I dispute the TV star bit, actually. But yes, it was a bit of a surprise when I was approached by the Attitude Foundation to see if I was interested in being part of this, part of the Perspective Shift series. It's certainly not something that I, as an academic, saw coming. I mean, academics tend not to be very much in the public eye, I think.
Is it fair to say you're someone who has defied a lot of assumptions in your life?
It's a difficult question to answer. I think probably yes, objectively. I say it's difficult to answer because obviously when you're sort of living in your life, you just do things that you want to do or you try to do them. You don't go out there necessarily, I think, consciously to try to challenge assumptions. That may happen along the way. And I think looking back, it's probable that I've not fit various stereotypes of a deaf person, let's say.
Let me phrase it better because, as you describe in Perspective Shift, you went to an elite school without having been from an elite background. You said you're from a mixed race heritage. You had hearing and you became deaf. It sounds like you have lived and you do live in a lot of spaces in your life.
I think that's probably true. And I think in the program I say I don't feel particularly hybrid, but I often feel quite liminal or at least on the borders between two different spaces, if you want to put it like that. As I said, mixed race. My father's background is Indian, my mother's background English. I lost my hearing late enough in my childhood that I was never particularly part of the signing deaf world, and that was not my parents' world either. But equally, I know that I don't fit into the hearing world very well. I'm also in a long-term relationship with my partner, who is a woman, and we've been together long enough that when we first got together, that was very definitely an unusual and liminal space to be occupying.
I've never entirely understood the word liminal. I only ever hear architects use it, and I think this might be the most I've understood that word in my life.
Perhaps I should stop using it then.
No, but you use it with
Mhm.
clarity, and I think I might finally understand. On ABC Radio Hobart and ABC Northern Tasmania, this is Jackie Leach Scully, Professor of Bioethics and Director of the Disability Innovation Institute at UNSW, and she's featured in the latest episode of ABC's Compass called Perspective Shift. Quaker groups have had a significant role in industry and education sectors in Tasmania. How did involvement with Quakers play a role in shaping the direction of your career?
Um, I'd found my way to Quakers when I was about 19. I was baptized Catholic, but not brought up particularly Catholic. But I became interested in the Quaker movement, the Religious Society of Friends in the UK, particularly because they're a religious group, but they focus very much on action and social justice and commitment to the practicalities of the world and so on. And that appealed to me then, and it still does. Um, they played a large part in my career development in an odd sort of way, because I was working in Switzerland as a bench scientist. I was a neurobiologist at that point, and for a number of reasons, I had a break in my contract, so I was not able to work in the laboratory at that time. And I applied for a fellowship that the British Quakers were offering to engage with what we then call public understanding of science. They wanted to employ somebody like me to go to Quaker and other religious groups and to do some educational and engagement work around what we then call genetic engineering, genetic manipulation. So I spent about a year and a half doing that in Britain, travelling around to. It was a sort of roadshow. I travelled from place to place to give a workshop or give a lecture or something along those lines to Quaker groups and other religious groups and to the general public. And at the end of that time, I realised that I didn't want to go back into the laboratory. I much preferred engaging with people in the way that I was, and listening to their concerns and talking to them about what they thought about science and genetic engineering, rather than spending my days filling up little plastic tubes.
And you are in a distinguished position as an academic with disability working in the sphere, yet how often do you still have to fight for day-to-day things in your work life to be accessible?
Every day. I'm not exaggerating. There are times when it's more than once a day. Sometimes it's not a fight. It's that people have forgotten to do something and they're perfectly okay about making it accessible. But it's so demoralizing and tiring and time wasting to know that you have to build in to everyday checking whether a meeting is going to be accessible, whether a public event that you're going to is going to be accessible. In my case, that's accessible to somebody with hearing impairment or deafness. So very often people say, oh yes, it's fine, it's completely accessible. And what they mean is that there is a ramp. Which is good in itself, but it's not accessibility. And what would be so good would be a situation in which I and other people like me didn't have to think about it, because it's standard operating procedure. The analogy I often use is it should be like switching on the electric light. You shouldn't have to tell people, please can you switch on the electric lights for me so that we can all see. And similarly, it should be that there are various kinds of accessibility options which are just taken for granted and not always there. And we're not there yet.
Is that part of the goal of your institute, to get us there?
Yes, it's to normalise accessibility and accommodation, and normalise the fact that there are people whose bodies and minds work differently, and quote marks, in the sense of differently from some kind of standard model that we imagine. the reality is that there are an enormous number of people whose bodies and minds and behaviours are different from what's supposed to be the norm. And our societies, our buildings, our systems are generally not accommodating of that.
My personal experience of illness and of disability is I feel guilty and I feel ashamed sometimes to ask people to accommodate me because of my differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had people resent my differences. How did you find the boldness to say, no, absolutely, you should accommodate me?
Yeah, that has changed in my lifetime, and I certainly still feel in myself the lingering awkwardness about asking for some change to be made, and it feels like, just for my benefit, the sense that I should feel grateful for whatever it is that people do. In that context, at least, I think gratitude is a really toxic thing. And there's also, I think, for a lot of people with disability, the fear that if you complain at all, then the little that you've got will be taken away.
Right.
So you're trying to negotiate a very narrow tightrope between making things possible for yourself without putting people's backs up so much that they then resent what you're asking for, as you said, resent making those accommodations. And that can be, it's such a tiring extra demand in everyday life. And I think it's one that a lot of people without disability don't notice. When friends or colleagues say to me, I never think of you as disabled, I feel really torn because I know it's coming from good intentions. But there's a tang there of, I don't think of you as being in some way inferior or inadequate because you do so well. And part of me wants to answer, well, you don't think of me as being disabled because I'm working bloody hard all the time to ensure that you don't, and ensure that you are not the one who is put out by the things that I need to make my life work.
The boldness to not live your life with that fear of, oh, I'm just lucky they let me be here at all.
Yeah. And I know that that's the same for a lot of people from marginalised social groups, whether it's women or people of colour, etc. There's that lingering sense of, I'm lucky to be here. I'm so glad they've let me into their club. I'm not going to rock the boat. But I think people with disability have been around long enough now, and the disabled people's movement and activism has been around long enough that we've gained a bit more confidence in saying, no, this just isn't acceptable. These things are my right by law. It's not that you're being nice in giving them to me.
Do you think there was a time, perhaps, when people's differences were accepted and then we went deep into a time of pathologizing them and everything being given a medical label and people being put in a box over there for being different? Will we come back around to just, oh, that's her, she's like that, that's him, he's like that, and just living with each other as humans in all our various shapes and forms?
Yeah, and I'd hope we would actually get it right, because you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Medicine can be a great thing. Diagnosis of conditions can be a great thing. This wasn't mentioned in the version of the program that you'll have seen, but I also have a liver transplant, which I had something like 7.5 years ago. I have to take immunosuppressive drugs every day to stop myself rejecting my transplanted organ. If that medical advance wasn't there, I wouldn't be here talking to you now. I would definitely be dead. And in fact, because my hearing loss is caused by meningitis when I was a child, if antibiotics hadn't been around, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would be dead. So there are enormous things that medicalisation and science and so on have brought us. Nevertheless, you can get over enthusiastic about it and think that the way to again, in quote marks, solve the problem of disability is to eradicate it or to cure it. I'm not going to get into a philosophical debate here about whether that would be a good thing, but just to say it's practically not, probably not possible, certainly not in the near future. Even if we're able to use genetic selection, prenatal selection or something to prevent the birth of all individuals with a genetically related disability, people would still get hit by trucks. They would still get cancer. They would still fall out of trees, so there would still be disability in the world. And I think we should begin to feel that that is something which is normal, may not always be recommendable or desirable, but it's certainly there and we should live with it. And sometimes there are benefits that come with having a different kind of body. In the days when those long gone days when we travelled around the world on long haul flights and so on, I tended to be one of the few people in the plane who got a good night's sleep because I could switch my hearing aid off and not have to listen to all the snoring and children's cries and so on around me. And my partner, who is a musician, sometimes says, and who has perfect hearing, sometimes says to me that she in a sense envies me in being able to switch it off or at least turn the volume down. So there are ways in which we can look at bodily differences, mental differences, psychological differences too, and think not necessarily that these are inferior or frightening because or pathological because they are different, but there might be ways in which we can learn from them.
Professor Jackie Leach Scully, before I let you go, I do need to encourage people, even though we've had quite an extensive conversation this afternoon, I do need to encourage people that they still need to watch you on that episode of Compass because they need to see how you nearly didn't meet your partner because of a hamster. It's like an episode of Faulty Towers was happening in your dorm room.
What the programme didn't say, what it cut out, was that the hamster was actually loose on the floor. I was giving it a little run around. So I didn't want it to escape from when I opened the door.
Love found a way.
Yes, it did, luckily.
Perspective Shift, that episode of Compass where you'll see Jackie Leach Scully is up on iView, and there'll be a repeat screening this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. on ABC TV. We've spoken over a Teams video call using their closed captions function.
Some shows